Hello, biology buddies. I hope you, your friends, and family are all well. Welcome to lesson 3 from the Unit B1 cell biology lessons. This lesson is on specialized cells, and it builds on the stuff that we learned about in lesson 1 and 2. So the different types of cells, animal cells, plant cells, bacteria cells, and then more specifically the organelles or cell structures that they have within them. When we talk about specialized cells, we'll be going through different examples of animal and plant cells. There are 3 animal cells and 3 plant cells that are on the AQA GCSE specification. We're going to consider all of those and then 1 extra animal and 1 extra plant cell because they come up quite a bit in Unit B2. Let's take a look at what we are going to be able to do at the end of this lesson. We'll be able to recall what a specialized cell is. As I just mentioned, we'll be able to describe different specialized animal and plant cells. We'll also be able to explain the function of those specialized cells, and then probably most importantly, we'll be able to link the structure to the function. And this idea of structure going with function is something that comes up again and again and again in biology, GCSE, A-level, university. Different cells, different organs are going to have different functions or jobs, and the structure of those organs or cells or tissues is going to match that function so that they're able to do that function. What is a specialized cell? It's one, as we just said, that has a specific function or job and a structure that allows it to do that function. When we talk about structure, we're not just talking about the organelles, the cell structures that are found within it. Does it have a few mitochondria? Does it have lots of mitochondria? Does it have ribosomes? Is it mostly empty? That sort of thing. We're also talking about the overall shape of the cell as well. There are 3 examples of specialized animal cells that we need to know according to the specification. Those are sperm cells, muscle cells, and nerve cells. We're also going to do a quick section on red blood cells as they come up in Unit B2. When we talk about the components of blood, the 4 components of blood, red blood cells play an important role in oxygen transport around the body, and they are very specialized to be able to do that function. So we'll have a closer look at those. We'll start then with the sperm cell. And for each of these cells as we go through, we're going to start by thinking, what is the function of the cell? What's the job? What does it do? And then try and think of the structures that it has that enable it to do that function really well. So to begin with, can you have a think about what the function of a sperm cell is? What's its only job? And then the structures that it has, either its shape or the organelles that are within it that enable it to do that. Have a quick think. Maybe write it down if you like, and we'll go through it together. So the function of the sperm cell, as I'm sure you thought up yourself, is to swim towards the egg and to fertilize the egg. Most often when students are answering a question like this, they will just talk about it swimming. But once it gets to the egg, it actually has to get inside the egg and fertilize it. By fertilize, we mean something very specific. This is where the nucleus of the sperm fuses with the nucleus of the egg to make a new nucleus that has a full set of chromosomes. For the structure, we can draw a picture of the sperm together. We'll start with the head of the sperm. We have a tail, or a flagella, flagellum, I should say. As we saw when we talked about the prokaryotes, this allows it to swim. We have the area just above the tail, contains lots of mitochondria. In the head, we have the nucleus, which contains the genetic information. And then above that, we have something called the acrosome, which contains the enzymes for getting into the egg. So if we had a question about what is the structure and function of a sperm cell, we could start by saying, well, the function is to swim to the egg and to fertilize it. What structures allow it to do that? Well, the long tail allows it to swim. Lots of mitochondria, those release the energy required for swimming. Remember, the mitochondria is where aerobic respiration happens. That releases lots of energy, which it then provides to the tail to be able to swim. The nucleus with half the chromosomes is for the process of fertilization, and the enzymes are there to get into the egg. So there's a sperm cell. We're going to follow this model. What's the function? What's the structure? Draw a picture for all of the other cells here. Next up then is the muscle cell. There's actually quite a few different types of muscle cells within animals and humans, including your cardiac muscle, which is in your heart. But for here, we're just going to consider basic muscle, nothing too fancy. What's the function of the muscle, and what is the structure of the muscle? What are the things in the muscle cells that allow it to do what it needs to do? So have a quick think, maybe write it down. The function of muscle cells, as we hopefully got, is to contract really quickly. So by contract, what actually happens with a muscle cell is that the muscle gets shorter. At A level, you'll learn about how this happens. For now, all we need to realize is that when your muscle contracts, it gets shorter. You can do a little test with yourself right now. You have your bicep muscle and you have your forearm. There is a string-like part that attaches your forearm bone to your bicep muscle. When you contract your bicep muscle, the reason that your arm comes up towards your shoulder is because that muscle is getting smaller, it's contracting, it's getting shorter, which then pulls on that string-like material that's attached to the bone, and that pulls the bone up. Your tricep muscle does the opposite. When that contracts, it pulls the other side of the arm, so pulls it down. But all your muscles do is contract, they shorten, and then they relax. They go back to their normal shape. Don't say that muscles pull or push. Don't say that muscles get longer. All muscles do is contract and then relax. So let's draw a picture of what some of these muscle cells might look like. Inside each of these, you have a nucleus, and then you're going to have, really importantly, lots of mitochondria. Remember, the mitochondria has that double layer. Incredibly bad drawings here, but hopefully we get the point. And why do we need lots of mitochondria? That should be obvious. Mitochondria, remember, release energy through aerobic respiration. And that energy is being used to contract and relax. Now, jumping ahead to the beginning of Unit B2, muscle cells work together to make muscle tissue. So specialized cells work with the same specialized cell, a whole bunch of them, to make a tissue. Different specialized cells, different tissues work together to make an organ. Different organs work together to make an organ system. And then all of those organ systems together make an organism. But for now, what we need to remember is muscle cells contract really quickly, relax really quickly. And for that, they need long cells because that allows it to get shorter. But more importantly, there are lots of mitochondria, and those mitochondria release the energy necessary for that contraction to occur. Next up is a nerve cell or neuron, and we'll be learning more about these in Unit B5 when we talk about the nervous system. Have a think about what the function of a nerve cell or neuron is. Have a think about what the structure is. What is it that nerves do? A lot of you will have said that they transmit information or signals around the body. What they're really doing, you're not wrong, but more specifically, they're transmitting electrical impulses. So you have potential differences that occur within the neurons. Those travel along. That's what the impulse is. They arrive at a synapse, which again we'll learn more about in B5, and can be then transmitted via chemical messengers to other neurons, etc., etc. Because the nerve cells are essentially a series of, you can almost think of them as wires throughout the body, there needs to be lots of different opportunities for them to connect to other neurons. So at the both ends, and we'll draw it in a second, at both ends you have these branch connections so that they can connect to other neurons or to muscles or to other effectors like glands. And like muscle cells, they are going to work together. So you have a whole bunch of nerve cells or neurons. Those work together to make nervous tissue. And then, as we'll see, those work together to make up the peripheral and central nervous system, which then works together as an organ system to contribute towards making a person. The other bit that's really important is the long cytoplasm. It's the cytoplasm that is going to be carrying those electrical impulses. So having a long cytoplasm is important. Some of your neurons in your body are very, very long. Some of them are very, very short, but all of them have what's known as an elongated cytoplasm. That's the axon of the neuron for those of you who want to jump ahead and start thinking about B5. Okay? So in terms of sketching a nerve cell, you're going to have your long cytoplasm or axon, which is going to terminate in possibly a bunch of branches off to other neurons, or as I said before, to an effector like a muscle or a gland. And then at the top here you have the cell body with the nucleus, and then these other attachments coming off that can go to form connections known as synapses with other neurons. So that is a nerve cell. Those are the three you need to know according to AQA for Unit B1. We're going to move on to red blood cells, which come up in B2. Really, really important. Those transport oxygen from lungs to the respiring tissues or cells. And remember, when we say respiring, we mean aerobic respiration to release energy. If you think respiring means breathing, there's a biologist somewhere in the world that starts to cry, so please don't say that. Please don't think that. Red blood cells are funny cells. They don't have a nucleus. They're one of the few cells in the human body that doesn't have a nucleus. And the reason they don't have a nucleus is so that you can have more hemoglobin in it. Hemoglobin is a pigment that carries the oxygen. So it has iron in it that binds to the oxygen, and it's the hemoglobin that binds the oxygen. So red blood cells need those because they transport oxygen. They're picking up oxygen at the lungs, and then they're dropping it off at the respiring cells and tissues. When we say biconcave shape, biconcave is a tricky word. Really what it means is, the best way I can think of to describe it is a donut where the hole doesn't go completely through. Okay, so if we were to draw sort of it from the side, it might look like this. From overhead, it's going to look like a donut, but that hole doesn't go completely through. You have sort of rounded edges. Okay. Biconcave, two caves, think of two caves back to back. There's no hole all the way through the middle. The reason that you have a biconcave shape is to increase the surface area of the red blood cell. When we talk about diffusion, osmosis, active transport, later on at the end of this unit, this idea of surface area becomes really, really, really important. Surface area is all of the bits that can touch things, okay? You'll think about it a lot in chemistry as well when you get to rates of reaction. If you have a block of something, that's going to have a smaller surface area than if you took that block and you smashed it up into little tiny pieces. There's the same amount of stuff there, but when you smash it up, there's more of that stuff that's exposed to react with other things. So by having a biconcave shape, there's more of the red blood cell that can touch things to take in oxygen, but also to release the oxygen at the respiring tissues. So it increases the surface area to increase the rate of diffusion. Okay, so those are our animal specialized cells. Let's take a look at some of the plant ones now. There are 3 examples of specialized plant cells. Again, we're going to consider a 4th one that comes up in Unit B2. There's the root hair cells, the xylem cells, and the phloem cells. Okay. We're also going to look at palisade cells. Now, whether you know it or not, you've already done palisade cells, especially in lesson 1 where we drew just a plant cell. That was essentially a palisade cell that we were drawing. Let's start with the root hair cell. So similar to the animal cells, those of you who were paying attention, you'll notice that I put the red blood cell slides for these backwards. Oops. But we're back on track now with the root hair cell. So root hair cell, give you a clue, it's found in the root, so underground. What is the function of the root hair cells? What do the roots do? And then how does its structure allow it to do that well? Have a quick think. One of the things for the structure is going to be a lack of or an absence of organelles or cell structure that we find in other parts of the plant. So the job of the root hair cell is to absorb water through osmosis, which we'll learn about at the end of this unit. Osmosis we talk about whenever we're talking about the movement of water from a dilute to a concentrated solution through a partially permeable membrane, and also nutrients and mineral ions from the soil into the root. And often, but not always, this will happen via active transport, which again we will talk about at the end of Unit B1. In terms of its structure, most obviously it does not have chloroplasts. Why doesn't it have chloroplasts? Why is that obvious? Because it is underground, so there's no light. It'd be quite wasteful of the plant to build chloroplasts in its root cells because there's no light, so it can't do photosynthesis, so it's completely pointless to have them there. It also has a large surface area. There's that word surface area again, which are the hairs. So if we're to draw a root hair cell, kind of looks like a rectangle with a long nose maybe. So this bit here is our root hair. You have your cell wall, your cell membrane, your nucleus, and your vacuole. The vacuole here is going to be very big and will typically extend into that hair. So that root hair is the thing that increases the surface area. By having a bit that can stick out into the soil, it's more likely to be able to get the water and the mineral ions or nutrients that it needs. Oops. You have a fairly thin wall as well to allow this stuff to get in and out easily. But if you focus on the fact that it has a root hair to increase the surface area so that you get a higher rate of osmosis or a higher rate of active transport, you're going to get full marks on a root hair cell question. For the xylem and the phloem, we're not going to worry about you guessing what the function and the structure are. If you already know, brilliant. But the xylem transports water up the plant from the roots to the leaves. In the water, you're going to have some mineral ions dissolved. But water flow in a plant is pretty much one directional. It gets taken up by the roots, it goes up the plant through the stem to the leaves, and then out of the leaves via the stomata, which are the little holes in the leaf, through a process called transpiration. The movement of the water from the roots to the leaves is called the transpiration stream, and we get into that in more detail in Unit B2. And then the loss of the water out of the leaf via the holes called the stomata is called transpiration. Okay, so the purpose of the xylem is just to transport water and the stuff that's dissolved in the water. You can think of it, plants have a couple of different tubes, if you will, to transport things around the body. We have our blood vessels, which is going to transport our nutrients, our oxygen, etc. Plants have two different main tubes or transport systems. One of them is xylem, and it's the water. How is xylem specialized? Xylem is essentially a bunch of cells stacked on top of each other that are completely hollow. The xylem is actually dead. It's not a living part of the plant. It's just empty tubes, no cytoplasm or anything like that in them. They're very long and they go up, 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 up from the roots to the leaves. And that's all there is to it. So for the xylem, it's really not a question of what do they have that makes them special. It's what do they not have. There's no nucleus, there's no cytoplasm, there's no mitochondria, there's no chloroplast, there's nothing. It's just a hollow dead tube that goes up the plant. The phloem, by contrast, is alive. In A-level biology, you'll learn a lot about things like companion cells that work next to the phloem to keep it alive. But the phloem is also pretty empty. It's not completely empty, but it's pretty empty. And what the phloem does is it transports assimilates, which is a word you'll use at A-level, but at GCSE you can just use the word glucose if you like, or sugars. It's going to transport those from where there's lots of it in the plant to where there's not much in the plant. So it can go up and down, whereas the xylem can just go up. You might be thinking to yourself, well, the glucose is being made in the leaves and it's going to go down the plant to wherever it's needed, so it's not really going to go up and down. That's true in some circumstances, but consider things like a potato. What's a potato? It's a bag of starch, which is just glucose put together into a big molecule for storage. The potato plant does photosynthesis, it makes glucose, it sends that glucose down the phloem to the bottom of the plant where it grows these carbohydrate stores, these starch balls underground, so that in winter or when it really needs those carbohydrates and it can't do a lot of photosynthesis, it has that store and it can break the starch down. So in those cases, your phloem is going to transport your sugar from the bottom of the plant to the top of the plant. So often you'll see the word source to sink. Source just means where there's lots. Sink means where there's not much. Consider this the next time you eat potatoes. Essentially, there is a plant who worked really, really hard to store all of this glucose as starch underground for a meal later in the year when it was going to need it. And then we greedy humans came along and stole the potato and ate it for our supper, maybe with some fish or something like that. So the next time you eat potatoes, think of the lowly plant that invested a lot of its time into making that carbohydrate store in the first place. How is the phloem different to the xylem? That got a bit weird there, I apologize. You're still going to have these relatively hollow tubes stacked on top of each other, but you're now going to have in between them these things called sieve plates, which, like the name would suggest, are plates with little tiny holes like a sieve in them. They're not completely hollow, they're still alive, there's still a bit of cytoplasm in there. So unlike the xylem, they're not completely hollow, but they're mostly hollow. A lot of their organelles and things that would keep them alive, it's other cells around them that help do that. Okay, so there's phloem. Ways to remember it: xylem goes with water, phloem goes with sugar. X and W are right next to each other in the alphabet. P and S are not right next to each other. There's a couple of pesky letters in the way there, but they're pretty close. So that's one way to remember which one transports what. Hopefully that helps. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I guess time will tell. Last but not least, we have the Palisade cell. And the Palisade cell is found in the leaf. And whenever somebody draws a plant cell, they're almost always going to draw a Palisade cell without even thinking about it. So these are at the top layer of the leaf. They have a vacuole, they have a nucleus, they have their ribosomes, they'll have some mitochondria. They'll have their cell wall, their cell membrane. We won't draw the cell membrane because it's right next to the cell wall, but it's there. Most importantly, they're going to have loads and loads and loads and loads of chloroplasts. Why? Because they're at the top of the leaf, so they're going to get the most sunlight, the highest intensity of light, which means they're going to be able to do the most photosynthesis. Now, this isn't on the list that AQA publishes as part of their specification of specialized cells that you need to know, but it comes up quite a bit in Unit B2 when we talk about the structure of a leaf and we talk about photosynthesis. So the Palisade cell is where photosynthesis is happening. Remember, photosynthesis is where the plant is using energy from light to build molecules, to build glucose specifically. So it's taking carbon dioxide and water, and then making glucose, C6H12O6. Don't worry if you don't know that now. You will know it by the end of B4. And water. And it's the light energy that helps to run that. For those of you who are completionists, you want to have a balanced symbol equation here. It's 6, 6, 6. 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O makes, not equals, makes or produces or reacts together to form C6H12O6 plus 6 H2O. So that there is glucose. It's found at the top of the leaf so that it can get the most light. And it contains lots of chloroplasts so that it can do lots of photosynthesis. It has a high rate of photosynthesis. Okay, so we've been through 4 specialized animal cells, 3 of which are explicitly on the AQA GCSE spec. We've been through 4 plant cells, specialized plant cells, 3 of which are explicitly on the GCSE AQA spec. In Unit B2, we're going to start to look at how some of these work together to form tissues and then organs. But for now, we need to know what a specialized cell is, have some examples, and then link their structure to their function. Let's have a look at the outcomes that we started with. Recall what a specialized cell is. You need to be able to say what a specialized cell is. Describe the structures of different plant and animal specialized cells. So for the plant, we had the root hair cell, the xylem, the phloem, and a palisade cell. For the animal cells, we had the sperm cell, the muscle cell, the nerve cell, and the red blood cell. Explain the function of those specialized cells, so what is their job, and then link the structure to their function. And remember, when we said structure, we mean their shape and the organelles they have, or, as we saw in a couple of examples, don't have. So as an example of shape, your sperm cell has the tail or the flagellum that helps it to swim. In terms of the organelles they have, sperm and muscle have lots and lots of mitochondria, so they can do lots of aerobic respiration to release the energy that the sperm needs to swim, the muscle needs to contract and relax. The red blood cells don't have a nucleus so that they can hold more hemoglobin. The other cells don't have hemoglobin, but they do have a nucleus. The root hair cell doesn't have chloroplasts because it's underground, but it does have this hair-like structure which sticks out, which increases its surface area. The xylem and the phloem are empty of most things. The xylem empty pretty much completely. The phloem empty of most organelles. And then the palisade cells have loads and loads and loads of chloroplasts. Okay, so being able to link the structure to the function. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next lesson when we are going to take a step back from the biology theory and take a look at some of the maths that we need to use. So we're going to look at standard form and scientific units. Thank you. Bye-bye.